Our story begins with Ilya Salkind, who came third in a line of film producers, beneath his father Alexander and his grandfather Mikhail. He had the idea to turn Superman into a movie. No one had ever properly translated a comic book hero as famous as Superman into a full-length film. But Ilya, in a burst of youthful optimism, not only wanted to make one film, but two at the same time, just as he and his father had done with the Musketeers. Ilya and his father partnered with Pierre Spengler, and at a cost of $3 million, secured the Superman rights for 25 years from Warner Bros. And DC Comics. Puzo's script, which covered both movies, was a hefty one, clocking in at somewhere between 400 and 600 pages, depending on who you ask. Among the other writers that had a hand in what would eventually become the final script are Robert Benton, David and Leslie Newman, George MacDonald Fraser, and Tom Mankiewicz. Long before Reeve was cast, though, even before Donner was brought in, they managed to secure Marlon Brando, one of the biggest actors of the time, to play Jor-El. Ilya Salkind reports that when Brando was first suggested to him, he laughed it off as a lark, but was convinced by his father to reach out anyway, just in case. For a hefty salary of $3.7 million and nearly 12% of the profits, Brando agreed. In addition to their scenes for Superman, both Brando and Hackman also filmed their scenes for the sequel, which was still planned to be filmed at the same time. Brando's footage wasn't used in the theatrical release of Superman 2, though, and I'll explain why when I cover that movie. When things went over budget and over schedule, plans to shoot both films simultaneously were dropped. The ending of the sequel was switched to the ending of the first movie, which was originally supposed to end in a cliffhanger, and tensions between the director and the producers reached such a boiling point that director Richard Lester, who was actually suing the Salkinds at the time, was brought in to mediate between them. Superman, alternatively called Superman the Movie, released in December of 1978. Critics lauded it, and it would earn a worldwide gross of just over $300 million. The movie was clearly successful enough to continue work on Superman 2, which according to Richard Donner, was already 75% complete by the time Superman the Movie hit theaters.
I would have you murdered. All you'll ever be.
The world has gotten used to being protected by that benevolent alien Superman, but what if he decided to quit? What if, just when the world needed him the most, he decided to become as human as the rest of us, powerless to do anything as the Kryptonian war criminal Zod lands on Earth with designs for conquest and domination? Lois Lane has learned Superman's secret identity, Lex Luthor has broken out of prison and found the Fortress of Solitude, and the President of the United States has been forced to kneel before Zod. Who will save the Earth now with Superman gone? Before I get to the production history of Superman 2, let me disclaim, like I did in my Superman 1 review, that there is a lot of conflicting information about the behind-the-scenes drama surrounding the making of the first two Superman movies. I'll let it be known what my personal bias tells me near the end of this video, but for now, I'm going to attempt to remain neutral and just stick to the verifiable facts of the case. As before, I'll try to keep this relatively uncomplicated, but know that I'm glossing over a lot of details and movie business shenanigans, because I don't want to be here all day. In 1979, given the remarkable financial success of Superman the Movie, and the fact that, according to Richard Donner, the sequel was already 75% in the can, you'd be forgiven for believing that the making of Superman 2 would be a cakewalk. However, the problems had begun while the first film was still in production. The budget had ballooned to upwards of $100 million for both films, the planned ending of the sequel had been repurposed as the ending of the first movie, the father-son production duo of Alexander and Ilya Salkind were forced to make a dubious deal with Warner Brothers that led to the studio earning the majority of the film's profits, and tensions between Richard Donner and producer Pierre Spengler came to a head, to the point that, when discussing the sequel with the press, Donner famously said, "If he's on it, I'm not." Immediately after the first film's release, it only got worse. Instead of basking in the glow of their success, the Salkinds were facing litigation against them by none other than Marlon Brando, whose contract stipulated a percentage of the film's profits that the Salkinds refused to pay. As a result of this, Brando's scenes in the sequel, which had already been filmed, were completely cut, his credit was erased, and he made no money from the sequel. Additionally, with Donner's ultimatum on the table, he too was let go, with directing duties ultimately falling into the lap of Richard Lester, who had served as an intermediary between the producers and Donner on Superman 1. A few prominent crew members refused to return out of loyalty to Donner, including editor Stuart Baird and writer Tom Mankiewicz, along with star Gene Hackman, who was still happy to be involved with the marketing but who didn't come in for reshoots. With rewrites needed in order to find a new ending and work around the absences of Brando and Hackman, it was up to David and Leslie Newman, working in concert with the producers, to fill in the gaps. There is some debate as to whether or not guild rules required a certain percentage of the film to be directed by Lester, necessitating the removal of much of Donner's previously filmed footage, but there were some fairly dramatic changes made to the script, requiring the addition of several new scenes, including an extended and reworked sequence of events at Niagara Falls, and, of course, a new conclusion. I'll talk more about these changes later when I get to the 2006 Richard Donner cut of the film, but for now, it's important to note that, despite all these changes, a significant portion of the film, I'd guesstimate about half, is still made up of Richard Donner footage. Keen eyes can tell the differences by spotting physical changes in the cast, especially Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder, and by noticing the overuse of cheap-looking blue-screen composites. The Salkinds, still fighting an uphill battle with money, were obviously slashing costs wherever they could. This episode is made possible in part by the contributions of viewers like you. If you'd like to support what I do with more than just a like or subscribe, you can check out my Patreon to get early access to videos, vote on future topics like this one, and more. I'd like to offer a special thanks to my $8 patrons: Batty Bat Firebrand, Chuck Poor, Diane McGill Davis, Giffen Chumley, John Burrell, Mike O'Connor, Numinous 2019, Robert McGill, Scott Johnner, Sean Vale, Spoats, TB Schromick, and Warren Davis, and shout out my other patrons and channel members as well. I sincerely couldn't do this without you. Now then, let's get back to the subject at hand. While the production was on hold to deal with all of these behind-the-scenes challenges, Christopher Reeve's contract lapsed, and he went to work on Somewhere in Time, which is another movie I've already covered. I didn't pronounce Mackinac Island properly in that video, and the comment section will never let me forget it, so feel free to go over to that video once you finish this one, and give me more grief. Anyway, as a result of Reeve not being available, the Salkinds attempted to sue him for breach of contract, which ultimately failed because Reeve was not, in fact, in breach of his contract. Therefore, he was able to renegotiate a new contract for his return as Superman. He was skeptical of the new script, nervous about the firing of Richard Donner, and concerned that the sequel would be, quote, a rip-off movie held together with chewing gum, unquote. The exact nature of his new contract is a subject of speculation, but according to Reeve, he was less concerned about holding out for more money than he was in holding out for a measure of creative control. The rest of the cast came aboard with little issue, not counting Brando and Hackman, of course. Margot Kidder, Jackie Cooper, and Mark McClure are back as Lois Lane, Perry White, and Jimmy Olsen, respectively, and Susanna York reprises her role as Superman's mother, Lara, in order to take the place in the plot that was previously held by Brando's Jor-El. Terrence Stamp returns as the villainous Zod, whose appearance in the first film was little more than a cameo, setting up his larger role here, along with his Kryptonian companions Ursa and Non, as played by Sarah Douglas and Jack O'Halloran. As for Lex Luthor and his compatriots, played by Gene Hackman, Valerie Perrine, and Ned Beatty, their scenes were already completed, and for scenes with Luthor that had to be reworked, a less than convincing double was brought in to face away from the camera. Some notable additions for Superman 2 are the great E.G. Marshall as the President, Clifton James playing the same redneck sheriff he always seems to play, the wrestler Pepper Martin as the scumbag Rocky, Richard Griffiths as one of the terrorists, and Shane Rimmer as one of the controllers, alongside a returning John Ratzenberger. There are also more cameos, including one from Jean-Pierre Cassel as this French general, and another one from ousted director Richard Donner. Filming for all the new sequences under the direction of Richard Lester began in August or September of 1979 at Pinewood Studios in London, where the entire Fortress of Solitude set had to be rebuilt. Despite the purse tightening of the Salkins, there was still a lot of location shooting of dubious necessity, such as a very brief shot of Superman going to a tropical island that was filmed in St. Lucia in the Caribbean. A new opening was filmed centering around the Eiffel Tower, which was done through a combination of location shooting, model work, and studio shots. The Niagara Falls sequence was filmed on location, and some of the shots of Clark Kent hitchhiking back to his fortress were filmed in Norway. The two major action sequences of the film, the destruction of a Midwest small town and the climactic fight in Metropolis, were filmed on sound stages, backlots, and one large outdoor set that was built in rural England. Lester's directorial style was naturally different from Donner's in that he preferred a 3-camera setup with far fewer takes. This had drawbacks for the actors, but it was a more economical use of time and money, allowing the film to stay on budget and on schedule the way Superman 1 had not. After the film's release, critics would credit Lester, a more comedic director, for a perceived lighter tone with more jokes, but while Lester certainly didn't adhere to Donner's more epic and serious vision of the film, most of the cute gags are still found in Donner's footage. In fact, Lester cut out quite a few. For the sake of clarity, the scenes in the theatrical cut that were Donner's include the diner scenes, the moon sequence, all of the Hackman scenes, the White House scenes, and a handful of individual action shots, while the scenes that are definitely Lester's include the opening sequence at the Eiffel Tower, the Niagara Falls sequence, the Midwest scenes, the Battle of Metropolis, and the ending. Incidentally, I keep calling it the Midwest because that's what it says in the script, and that's what the producers and directors called it in all of the audio commentaries I listened to. Even though, in actuality, according to the movie, it takes place in East Houston, which is in Texas.
So this is Planet Houston.
As for the music, John Williams was unavailable. There have been multiple reasons suggested as to why, with Williams insisting it was merely a scheduling problem, others arguing that the Salkins were trying to save money, and another persistent rumor claiming that a heated argument between Williams and producer Pierre Spengler was to blame. Regardless of the reason, he had to be replaced, and Lester immediately chose Ken Thorne for the job. With 6 weeks, a slightly smaller orchestra, and all of Williams' original cues to work with, Thorne was able to put together a score for Superman 2 that feels almost identical to its predecessor. Thorne does have a few of his own compositions in there, but they meld pretty well into Williams' work. Superman 2 had an unusual release schedule, first premiering in Australia in December of 1980, before dropping in other parts of the world until the following summer, when it finally released in the US and Canada. It set new box office records on its American release, taking the highest-grossing opening weekend from Star Trek the Motion Picture and the highest single-day gross from Star Wars. All told, it earned a worldwide box office total of $190 million. It was a hit with critics as well, with several even considering it better than the original, an opinion shared by the majority of fans for decades. There can be no underestimating how influential Superman 1 was in terms of launching the superhero movie genre, but the true franchise potential of superheroes wasn't demonstrated until Superman 2. It made more money on home video, and it played more frequently on television around the world, with various scenes either cut or added to various markets. A fan-made supercut that tried to include all of this footage was released in 2004, much to Warner Bros.' ire. Then, in 2006, Warner Bros. Released the so-called Richard Donner cut of Superman 2, which was made almost entirely without Richard Donner's involvement, using previously thought to be lost footage, at least one scene that had only been shot as test footage, and as little of Lester's version as possible. It also pretends the original film didn't steal its ending, showing the previously scripted and shot cliffhanger where the rocket Superman launches into space is what sets the Kryptonian supervillains free, and thus the Richard Donner cut uses the space-time defying plot device to undo everything in its final moments. It is a bit continuity breaking with the original film, and it does have a lot of issues with the Frankenstein nature of its assembly, but in my opinion, it is the superior version of the film. You really get a sense for what Donner was going for, and you can see some of the baffling changes that were made for the theatrical version, such as the removal of a much better reveal of Clark Kent's identity. The biggest thing it restores, though, is Marlon Brando, revealing just how dramatically his absence hurts the story of the theatrical version of Superman 2. No matter how hard the Salkins try to post hoc an explanation for using the mother as opposed to the father, it is clear from the Richard Donner cut how much better and more impactful it is with Jor-El as opposed to Lara. I will defend a few things about the theatrical version, starting with the end. The scene where Clark Kent realizes how much pain he's caused Lois and decides to undo it with a kiss is far more powerful than the goofy time travel nonsense. Both are ridiculously contrived plot devices, but it's not like the comic book Superman is immune from such things. He's done far stupider things, believe me. And that leads me into where I stand on the whole Donner versus the Salkins debate. While I find it easy to believe that Donner let his ego get in the way, or that his less economical style of filming wasn't going to work for the financially strapped Salkins, I think I'm more on Donner's side here, and it's not just because I think the Richard Donner cut is superior to the original cut. I find it very hard to be charitable to the Salkins in my interpretation of events when I consider how many stupid lawsuits they found themselves in. Even Richard Lester was at one point wrapped up in litigation, and with their attempt to sue their new star, Christopher Reeve, and their blatant abuse of Marlon Brando, the benefit of the doubt kinda goes out the window. This is entirely speculation on my part, but I believe the financial situation with the Salkins was far worse than has been reported. It is obvious in hindsight that they cut massive corners in Superman 2, and their firing of Richard Donner seems a little petty and unprofessional, even if they can argue that Donner set the stage for it with his ultimatum about Pierre Spangler. While I still give Ilya Salkind most of the credit for the success of Superman the movie, I do believe that the Salkins and Pierre Spangler were a net detriment to Superman 2, as evidenced by how badly they would go on to fumble Superman 3, which I'm sure I'll talk about in a future video. All that said, I still love Superman 2, even the theatrical version. It's not as thematically dense as its predecessor, to be sure, but it does have the benefit of having the superhero origin story out of the way. As such, it is more action-packed and has more time to let the characters breathe. It shows Superman's vulnerability, with love being his real kryptonite, and it gives Lois Lane a strong arc where she finally notices the glaringly obvious similarities between Clark Kent and Superman that have become kind of a joke of his character. Granted, I'm not a fan of erasing all that development in the end, be it through a magical kiss or turning back time, but comic book movies wouldn't embrace universe-changing events like that until Marvel came around a few decades later. So is the sequel better than the original? Maybe you'll say it's a cop-out, but I think it depends on what you're asking for. I think the original Superman is probably the better film in terms of artistry and writing, but I think Superman 2 is more entertaining. If I could watch only one, therefore, I'd probably watch the sequel, because at the end of the day, it is the exciting epitome of a sci-fi classic. And that's all for today, my fellow Earthlings. What sequels do you enjoy more than their predecessors? Let me know in the comments, and while you're there, don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Thank you for watching, and until next time, when we'll discuss one of the possible alternatives to global climate change, this is the Unapologetic Geek, telling you to never be ashamed of what you love, as long as you're not hurting anybody.
Oh, God.
Zod.
One, two, three.